My name is Ella Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and the day my mother decided my life was worth less than my brother's, I was sitting across from her with a neurosurgeon's estimate inside my coat pocket. My brother had been arrested that morning. Before sunset, my parents had emptied their savings, borrowed against their house, and promised a private attorney another $30,000 to get him released. Yet when I explained that a malformed blood vessel in my brain could rupture without surgery, my mother barely glanced at my medical scans. "We can't save everyone," she said. "If one of you has to die, better you than him." My father didn't hesitate. He has a company, employees, and a future. He's always been our priority. You're on your own. I stared at them, waiting for an apology or some sign that they understood what they had just said. Neither came, so I smiled. "Thanks for finally showing me where I stand." They mistook that smile for surrender. They didn't know my name was still attached to the financial guarantee protecting my brother's company. They didn't know I had discovered documents bearing a signature I never wrote. And they certainly didn't know that one call from me could collapse everything they had sacrificed my life to protect. I walked out without raising my voice. Exactly 2 months later, my phone showed 45 messages and 68 voicemails. My mother's final message said, "Please, Ella, just one conversation. We have nothing left to fall back on." But before I tell you what I uncovered, what my brother had done, and why my parents suddenly needed the daughter they were willing to lose, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before the truth finally comes out. For most of my childhood, I believed my parents treated my younger brother differently because he needed more attention. When he broke a window, they called him energetic. When I came home with mud on my shoes, I was careless. When he failed algebra, my father hired a tutor. When I earned a scholarship, my mother warned me not to become arrogant. I kept waiting for the imbalance to disappear as we grew older, but it only became the foundation of our family. My brother was Ethan Whitmore, 26, charming enough to earn a stranger's trust within minutes, and reckless enough to mistake trust for permission. He could arrive late, unprepared, and smiling, and somehow everyone else apologized for starting without him. Our parents called it leadership. I saw a man who had never been required to survive the consequences of disappointing anyone. My mother, Denise Whitmore, managed a community foundation that awarded neighborhood development grants. My father, Richard Whitmore, worked in commercial real estate, connecting developers with abandoned industrial properties around Pittsburgh. Together, they were respected among donors, contractors, nonprofit directors, and local investors. I chose a quieter life. I became a paper conservator at a historical archive, repairing maps, court records, factory ledgers, and handwritten letters damaged by fire or water. My work required patience and precision. Some pages took weeks to stabilize because a careless movement could erase a century-old signature. I loved restoring damaged things without forcing them to pretend they had never been broken. My parents never understood my profession. At family events, my father said I fixed old paper. Ethan, meanwhile, was introduced as a visionary real estate entrepreneur, even when his company consisted mostly of a polished website, a borrowed office, and promises he could not afford to keep. His business, Iron Vale Renewal Group, claimed to transform abandoned factories into affordable housing and commercial spaces. The idea aligned perfectly with my mother's foundation contacts and my father's property connections. Within 18 months, Ethan had press coverage, investors, and access to buildings other first-time developers could never have touched. He also had my name on his first credit guarantee. 3 years earlier, my father told me Ethan needed a temporary co-signer to secure equipment financing. He promised the guarantee would expire after 6 months. I refused until my mother called me jealous, and my father accused me of sabotaging Ethan's future. Then Ethan appeared at my apartment with dinner and said he finally understood how much I had done for him. I signed. That decision became the most expensive mistake of my life, and eventually the weapon that shattered their lie. My health problems began with flashes of light at the edge of my vision. Then came headaches, numbness in my left hand, and brief episodes when I could hear people speaking but could not form words. I blamed exhaustion until I collapsed beside a work table and woke in an emergency department. Scans revealed an arteriovenous malformation near the region controlling language and movement. It might remain stable, or it could rupture without warning. Because my symptoms were worsening, the specialist recommended staged embolization followed by surgery. Even with insurance, the cost was overwhelming. I had savings, but not enough. My parents had always insisted family resources were available for real emergencies. I wanted to believe there was one boundary even their favoritism would not cross. 2 days before Ethan's arrest, I visited their house with my scans, the surgical estimate, and a repayment plan. My mother asked whether the procedure was truly necessary. My father suggested selling my car. Ethan never looked away from his phone. "We're finalizing a major acquisition," my father said. "This isn't the time to drain family capital." I reminded him that I was requesting a loan, not a gift. Ethan finally glanced up. "Can't you wait 6 months?" The doctor had warned me that waiting increased the chance of a hemorrhage. My mother sighed as if my brain had chosen an inconvenient moment to malfunction. "Your brother's project could create hundreds of jobs. Adults have to consider the larger picture." What kind of parent hears that a blood vessel inside her daughter's head may rupture and calls it poor timing? How many sacrifices can someone be asked to make before sacrifice becomes her assigned role? I left with the papers still in my bag. Then Ethan was arrested over forged property transfers, diverted investor funds, and false construction invoices. My parents drained their accounts, borrowed against their home, and hired an expensive defense attorney. That evening, when I asked whether they could still help with surgery, my mother said it would be better for me to die than him. After leaving, I drove to the archive and sat in the underground garage. I expected to cry. Instead, I felt clarity. They had not chosen Ethan in a moment of panic. They had merely spoken aloud the choice they had made for decades. I opened the online portal connected to the guarantee I had signed 3 years earlier, expecting to confirm it had expired. It had not. The original loan had been refinanced twice, and my name remained attached to a revolving credit arrangement worth nearly $900,000. The records claimed I had approved the latest extension 14 months earlier. I had never seen it. At the bottom was my electronic signature. The date fell during a week when I had been attending a conference in Montreal, while the authentication record showed the approval came from an Iron Vale office computer. Ethan had not merely relied on my silence, he had turned it into collateral. The next morning, I called my closest friend, Naomi Carter, a theater sound technician with a gift for hearing what people tried not to say. I told her about the surgery, my mother's words, the forged authorization, and the guarantee that could leave me responsible for Ethan's debts. After a long pause, she asked, "Have you contacted a lawyer?" When I said no, she told me not to warn my family before doing so. By noon, I was sitting across from Margaret Sloan, an attorney specializing in financial fraud and identity misuse. She examined the original guarantee, the refinancing records, and the electronic approval. Had Ethan ever been authorized to sign for me? No. Did his company possess copies of my identification? Possibly. Had I received annual notices? Not that I remembered. Margaret requested the lender's audit trail and discovered that correspondence intended for me had been redirected to an office controlled by Iron Vale. The forgery was not an isolated shortcut. It was part of a system designed to keep me uninformed. Ethan had used my credit and guarantee to finance Calder Works, an abandoned machine parts factory he claimed would become affordable apartments and retail space. Investors had been told the property had clear title, approved environmental remediation, and committed commercial tenants. The records suggested otherwise. The title was burdened by old liens. Cleanup estimates had been altered. Several tenant letters were non-binding or fabricated. Investor deposits had flowed through vendors billing for demolition work that never happened. One vendor was connected to a post office box paid for by my father. Another had received a favorable grant recommendation from my mother's foundation. I wanted to believe my parents had also been fooled, but they had promoted the project, defended Ethan, and ignored every warning that threatened the family narrative. Margaret explained that I could notify the lender of the forged extension, demand removal from the guarantee, preserve the records, and cooperate with investigators. Because Iron Vale's financing depended on my backing, challenging the signature could trigger a default review. The lender might freeze funds, call the loan, or pursue secured assets. My parents had already pledged their home to cover Ethan's bail and legal expenses. If the company's financing collapsed, they could lose the remaining equity protecting them. I stared at my forged signature. The only thing standing between them and financial disaster was the stolen identity of the daughter they had told to die quietly. "Will they know I initiated this?" I asked. "Eventually," Margaret replied, "but protecting yourself from fraud is not revenge." Her words freed me from the belief that I had to invent their punishment. I only had to stop shielding them from what they had done. We sent the notice that afternoon. The lender froze Iron Vale's available credit and opened a formal review. Margaret forwarded the suspected forgery to the investigator named in Ethan's charging documents, along with travel records proving I had been outside the country when the approval was signed. The following day, my mother called from an unfamiliar number. "Did you contact Ethan's bank?" she demanded. No greeting, no question about my condition, no apology. I asked why she thought I had. "The lender froze his account. Payroll is due, and contractors are threatening to leave Calderworks." "Was my signature used to extend his loan?" She paused. "Your father handled the documents. There may have been an administrative shortcut." I repeated the phrase in disbelief. She insisted Ethan had been under pressure and reminded me that I had once agreed to support him. When I asked whether she knew my mailing address had been changed, her voice hardened. "This is not the time for accusations. Your brother could go to prison. And I could die without surgery. Stop being dramatic." I ended the call. During the next week, my father emailed a document titled Family Resolution Proposal. It asked me to retract the fraud allegation, affirm the guarantee, and state that I had verbally authorized Ethan to sign for me. In return, my parents would consider helping with part of my medical costs after Ethan's case was resolved. They wanted me to lie to investigators and accept nearly $1 million in possible liability for the chance that they might later help keep me alive. I forwarded everything to Margaret. 2 days later, my father appeared outside the archive wearing the navy overcoat he used for important meetings. "You've made your point," he said. "Now undo the damage." I asked whether he knew Ethan had used my identity. He looked away. "I knew he needed flexibility." "Did you know he redirected my notices?" "He was trying to keep the project alive." "When were you planning to tell me I could owe $900,000? "He said I would never actually have to pay if I stopped creating panic." That sentence revealed our entire family system. Harm was not real until I objected to it. Fraud was not fraud until I refused to cooperate. And my illness was not urgent because acknowledging it would inconvenience Ethan. Before leaving, he told me the family's annual redevelopment fundraiser would proceed the following month. My mother intended to reassure donors that Ethan's arrest was an accounting misunderstanding. "You will attend," he said. "You will stand with us, and this family will present a united front." They still believed my silence could be scheduled. I agreed to attend. I did not tell him that Margaret had discovered the event program included a presentation filled with claims contradicted by the evidence in my possession. My parents wanted me beside them while they repeated their lie. I decided to give them exactly that opportunity. The fundraiser took place inside a restored railway terminal before nearly 300 nonprofit directors, contractors, donors, journalists, investors, and city consultants. My mother built the evening around the theme, "Preserving Communities, Protecting Futures." The slogan appeared on banners, programs, and a projection screen behind the stage. I arrived in a dark green suit carrying a slim archival case. My mother stopped me outside the ballroom and whispered, "Thank God. I knew you would come to your senses." I told her I had come to listen. She explained that my father would acknowledge the family had faced challenges, Ethan's attorney would describe the charges as accounting confusion, and I would be invited on stage to announce that the signature dispute had been privately resolved. "No," I said. She tightened her grip around my wrist. "Do not punish us here. People who repeatedly harm you often discover the language of victimhood the moment you stop cooperating." I freed my arm and entered the ballroom. Naomi was working with the venue's audio team, while Margaret sat near the back beside two representatives from the lender. The evening began with polished speeches about renewal, ethics, and responsibility. My father described Calder Works as a symbol of Pittsburgh's future. My mother praised Ethan for continuing his mission despite unfounded attacks. Then Ethan walked onto the stage in a tailored charcoal suit, smiling as if his arrest were merely a public relations inconvenience. He spoke about abandoned neighborhoods, second chances, and the courage required to invest in visionary leaders. Watching him, I understood again why people trusted him. Ethan did not simply lie. He assigned everyone a flattering role. Investors became brave, critics became cynical. Our parents became guardians of progress, and I became the jealous sister threatening a noble cause. Near the end, he looked directly at me. "My sister is here tonight," he announced. "Our family has experienced private misunderstandings, but blood is stronger than fear." A spotlight moved toward my table. My father signaled for me to come forward. I crossed the room carrying the case. Ethan held out his arm as though inviting me into a family photograph, but I ignored it. He handed me the microphone and whispered, "Tell them we're okay." I faced the audience. "My name is Ella Whitmore. I restore historical documents for a living. My job is to determine what is authentic, what has been altered, and what damage someone tried to hide." Ethan's smile disappeared. I opened the case and displayed enlarged copies of the loan renewal bearing my forged signature, the authentication record from Ethan's office, the redirected mailing address, and the original guarantee limiting my consent to 6 months. My father moved toward the podium. "This is not the time or place." "You chose the time and place when you asked me to publicly validate a forged document," I replied. I explained that I had never approved the current loan, that the lender had frozen the credit line after receiving evidence of identity misuse, and that I had been in Montreal when the renewal was supposedly signed. Margaret had advised me to remain exact. Truth did not require exaggeration. Ethan grabbed the microphone and claimed I had known about the refinancing but was twisting events because of a family disagreement. "Where was I when the approval was signed?" I asked. He hesitated. I answered for him and showed the travel records. I also explained that correspondence had been redirected to prevent me from seeing the debt. My mother stepped onto the stage. "Ella is undergoing a serious medical crisis," she said. "She has been under tremendous emotional strain." My illness had finally become important, not as a reason to help me, but as a way to discredit me. I removed my phone from my pocket. "There is one more thing you should hear before deciding whether my memory is reliable." On the night Ethan was arrested, I had activated a voice memo application to record the surgeon's instructions and forgotten to stop it before speaking with my parents. Because I had participated in the conversation, Margaret confirmed I could disclose it. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the terminal. "We can't save everyone. If one of you has to die, better you than him." Then my father's voice followed. "He has a company, employees, and a future. He's always been our priority. You're on your own." The room went motionless. For 29 years, my parents had depended on the privacy of their cruelty. They could say anything behind closed doors and present themselves differently in public. The recording destroyed the wall between those versions. My mother reached for the phone, but the playback had already ended. Ethan insisted the conversation had nothing to do with Calder Works. "It has everything to do with this project," I said. You are asking these people to trust a family that forged my authorization, concealed financial notices, and pressured me to submit a false statement after I challenged it. My father leaned closer. You're destroying all of us. No, I answered. I'm stepping out from underneath what you built. One lender representative stood and announced that the institution had begun a fraud review and would accept no additional investments connected to Calder Works. A contractor demanded information about unpaid invoices. A donor asked whether foundation grants had supported companies linked to Ethan. Someone questioned the environmental reports. The perfect fundraiser transformed into an uncontrolled hearing. Ethan disappeared through a side door and my father followed him. My mother remained on stage, staring at me. How could you do this to your own family? She whispered. Which family? I asked. The one that needed my signature, or the one that was willing to let me die? I placed the microphone on the podium and walked away, while years of carefully managed respectability collapsed behind me. By the next morning, a video of my statement had spread through local business groups and social media. The most shared clip showed my father accusing me of destroying the family, followed by my response that I was stepping out from underneath what they had built. Reporters contacted the archive, and my director asked whether I needed security. I gave her Margaret's information and promised not to involve the institution in the case. My parents reacted differently. My father sent threats. My mother sent pleas. Ethan remained silent. Within 3 days, my phone showed 45 messages and 68 voicemails from relatives, family friends, former neighbors, unknown callers, and my parents. Some praised me. Others accused me of humiliating my mother. Several said they believed me but insisted I should have handled everything privately. Privately was where my family had buried every ugly truth. My mother's first messages were furious. She said I had no right to play the recording and that Ethan might never recover. By the 20th voicemail, she was asking me to speak with the lender. By the 50th, she sounded afraid. Please, Ella, just one conversation. My father's firm suspended him while reviewing his connections to vendors linked to Calder Works. My mother's foundation opened an independent audit. Donors withdrew support, contractors filed liens, and the lender declared Iron Vale in default. My parents' house was exposed because they had borrowed against it for Ethan's bail and pledged additional equity to support his company. Their safety net had not been destroyed by me. They had tied it to Ethan's risks, one decision at a time. Still, the aftermath hurt. At night, I remembered not only my mother's cruel sentence, but also the times she had taught me to read or cared for me when I was sick. Harmful parents are not harmful every minute. That is why leaving can feel like grieving the person you kept hoping they would become. I wrote a letter I never sent. I told my mother that one apology could not erase a lifetime of ranking her children. I told my father that providing food and shelter did not give him the right to use my identity. I told Ethan that every rescue had taught him consequences belong to someone else. Then I wrote, I do not know whether I am ending this relationship forever, but I am ending the version in which access to me is guaranteed. Naomi read the letter and asked whether I would send it. I said no. Writing it was not an invitation to continue the argument. It was a way to separate my truth from their demands. Investigators soon obtained Ethan's servers and uncovered altered reports, fabricated agreements, and messages about the forged renewal. In one exchange, Ethan wrote that I would complain for a week and then sign whatever kept the peace. My father replied, handle it before she sees the numbers. Another message showed my mother discussing a foundation grant that could reassure investors. Margaret warned that the records might not prove my mother understood the entire fraud, but they showed she had chosen not to question anything that protected Ethan. He was arrested again on charges including identity theft, wire fraud, falsifying records, and misusing investor funds. His bail was revoked after prosecutors argued that he had contacted witnesses through intermediaries. My parents' attorney requested a meeting. Margaret agreed only if it concerned removing my name from all obligations, acknowledging the forgery, and discussing restitution. We met in her conference room. My mother looked smaller than she had at the fundraiser. My father placed a folder on the table. After a long silence, my mother said they might lose the house, my father might lose his license, and she might be removed from the foundation. Then she asked, "Do you feel nothing?" I told her I felt many things. "Then help us," she said. "Not, we endangered you. Not, we are sorry. Help us." My father pushed forward a proposal. They would admit I had not personally signed the renewal if I stated that Ethan believed he had implied permission. They also wanted me to request leniency and stop speaking publicly. In return, they would transfer part of a retirement account toward my surgery. Even their surrender came with conditions. I asked my mother whether she remembered what she had said the night Ethan was arrested. She began crying. I was terrified. So was I. I thought he would go to prison. I thought I might die. She replied, "You were always stronger." That phrase had followed me all my life. It sounded like praise, but in our family, it meant I deserved less care because I had survived receiving less care before. "What does strong mean to you?" I asked. "That I feel no pain, or that you can keep hurting me because I remain standing?" My father called the conversation unproductive. I stood to leave. My mother reached across the table. "Ella, please. We have nothing left to fall back on." I moved my hand beyond her reach. "Neither did I said. "You called it being on my own." My surgery was scheduled 6 weeks after the fundraiser. I received nothing from my parents. Margaret helped place a hold on the disputed debt, allowing me to qualify for a medical payment plan. My employer's emergency fund covered part of the deductible, colleagues donated unused leave, and Naomi organized a small benefit performance without turning my illness into a spectacle. Accepting help felt uncomfortable because I had spent years believing support always concealed an obligation. My therapist called it learned self-reliance, not independence born from confidence, but isolation created because depending on others had repeatedly become dangerous. The night before the procedure, Naomi sat beside my hospital bed labeling my belongings with blue tape. I told her the hospital had already marked everything. "I don't trust hospital socks," she replied. "They look disloyal." I laughed harder than the joke deserved, releasing some of the fear inside me. The embolization lasted several hours, followed 2 days later by surgery. There were complications, though not the catastrophic ones I had imagined. When I woke, words came slowly. I recognized objects but struggled to name them. A nurse showed me a pen, and I could picture the word without reaching it. Panic rose, but the deficit improved during the following days. Speech therapy helped. My left hand regained strength, and the surgeon believed the most dangerous part of the malformation had been treated successfully. My parents continued calling. I did not answer. My mother left a message saying she had heard about the operation and wanted to know which hospital I was in. Her concern sounded real, and for one night I almost responded. The child inside me still wanted her mother beside the bed. Then I remembered that concern after public consequences did not erase indifference before them. Boundaries become hardest when the person who harmed you finally offers a fragment of what you once begged to receive. Hunger can make crumbs feel precious, but it does not make them a meal. I instructed the hospital not to release information. Because I could not immediately return to delicate conservation work, my supervisor moved me to digital cataloging. At first, I saw it as another loss. Then, I became fascinated by multispectral analysis, a technique used to reveal erased writing, faded ink, and hidden layers beneath visible text. I enrolled in a certification program and began assisting with disputed deeds, altered letters, and suspected forgeries. My family had mocked my profession as fixing old paper. Those same skills had helped me uncover the fraud used against me. Naomi and I also attended a support group for adults raised around a favored child. People spoke about financial exploitation, inheritance manipulation, forced caregiving, and medical neglect. One man asked, "If they never admit what they did, will you still permit yourself to heal?" Until then, I had imagined healing as a verdict. My parents would understand, Ethan would confess, and someone would declare that I had been right. But recovery that depended on their recognition was another form of dependence. I began measuring progress differently. I slept through the night, stopped checking blocked messages, attended appointments without apologizing for the cost, and declined requests without defending the word no. 3 months after surgery, I returned to the conservation lab. My first assignment involved a 19th-century labor ledger damaged in a warehouse flood. The pages had fused together, and entire sections seemed unreadable. Under controlled humidity, the fibers slowly relaxed, and lines of ink emerged from what had looked like stains. I thought about the woman who had entered her parents' house carrying medical estimates. She believed she needed their permission to consider her survival important. I wished I could tell her that their abandonment would not end her life. It would end an arrangement that required her to disappear. Meanwhile, investigators identified more than $2 million in investor losses connected to Ethan. Some funds had paid for real construction, making the fraud harder to detect. Other money covered personal expenses, old debts, and fabricated invoices. My father resigned before disciplinary proceedings ended, and his professional license came under review. My mother stepped down after the foundation audit uncovered undisclosed conflicts involving Ethan. Their house entered foreclosure. A relative sent me photographs of boxes stacked in the driveway. I deleted them. I did not need images of their collapse to validate my decision. Revenge stories promise satisfaction in watching cruel people lose everything. Reality was quieter. I did not celebrate when my parents moved into a rented apartment, or when Iron Vale entered bankruptcy. Their suffering could not restore the years I had spent believing my needs were shameful. Relief came from knowing they could no longer use my identity, money, labor, or silence to postpone consequences. That was the move that left them with nothing to fall back on. I had removed myself from the structure. Without me absorbing debt, repairing relationships, calming investors, and accepting blame, the family system could no longer pretend to function. 8 months after the fundraiser, Ethan accepted a plea agreement. He admitted to wire fraud, identity theft, and falsifying financial records. The court sentenced him to several years in federal prison and ordered restitution, though his victims were unlikely to recover everything. My father avoided criminal prosecution but lost his professional license after investigators concluded that he had concealed conflicts and facilitated misleading transactions. My mother was not charged, but the foundation permanently removed her. The public identity she had built around ethics and community service disappeared within months. I learned most of this through Margaret and did not attend Ethan's sentencing. A week later, a handwritten letter arrived at the archive from my parents' apartment. My mother had written 6 pages. She apologized for saying it would be better if I died, admitted she had protected Ethan because she feared he would collapse without constant support, and acknowledged that she had mistaken my competence for invulnerability. She wrote that every time I succeeded alone, she treated it as proof that I needed less love. One paragraph stopped me. I told myself you were strong because the truth was harder. You became strong because we repeatedly failed you. It was the first fully honest sentence she had ever given me. My father added a shorter note admitting that he knew Ethan had renewed the guarantee without consulting me. He said he believed I would eventually agree, and had rationalized the forgery as temporary. He did not ask for forgiveness. For several days, I carried both letters between my apartment and the archive. The old Ella would have answered immediately, rewarded every admission, softened every boundary, and rushed to prove she was not cruel. The woman I had become understood that forgiveness, reconciliation, and access were separate decisions. I could release the desire to punish them without returning to the role that nearly destroyed me. Eventually, I agreed to one conversation in a neutral office arranged by a family therapist. My parents entered together. They looked older, but visible suffering was not the same as transformation. My mother apologized without explanation. I chose Ethan over you for years, she said. I believed helping him required taking from you. My father admitted using my identity and pressuring me to lie. He said he did not expect forgiveness. I listened and then explained what contact would look like if I chose to continue it. There would be no financial involvement, no messages through relatives, no emergency demands, no access to my medical information, and no discussion of Ethan unless I initiated it. Any attempt to deny the past would end the relationship. My mother asked whether I still loved them. The answer was yes, which made the question painful. Love does not always disappear when trust becomes impossible. Sometimes love remains after safety is gone and distance becomes its healthiest expression. I love who I needed you to be, I said. I'm still learning whether I can have a relationship with who you actually are. She cried, but she did not argue. I did not promise another meeting. When the hour ended, I walked outside alone. Naomi was waiting across the street with 2 coffees. She asked how I felt. Not healed, I said, but free. A year has passed since the night my mother said it would be better for me to die than Ethan. My scans are stable, and my hand has recovered most of its strength. I now lead a digital forensics project at the archive, helping identify alterations in historical property records. I moved into an apartment with enough room for a proper desk and books I no longer need to pack away for family emergencies. My parents and I exchange occasional letters through the therapist. I have not visited their apartment or spoken to Ethan. That may change one day, or it may not. The lesson is not that every wounded person should publicly expose relatives or permanently cut contact. Every situation carries different risks. The lesson is that love does not require participation in your own destruction. A boundary is not revenge, simply because someone suffers when they can no longer exploit you. Telling the truth is not cruelty, because a lie protected someone's reputation. Choosing medical care, financial security, dignity, or peace does not make you selfish, because another person preferred your sacrifice. My family taught me that strength meant enduring whatever they placed on my shoulders. I know better now. Strength is not how much harm you can survive without complaining. Strength is recognizing when survival requires putting the burden down. Have you ever been labeled the strong one so others could justify giving you less? Have you been expected to rescue someone who was never required to protect you? And if the people closest to you proved their love depended on your obedience, what would it take to choose yourself? My mother believed losing me was acceptable. What she never understood was that I did not have to die for her to lose me. She only had to keep treating my life as expendable. My name is Ella Whitmore. I did not destroy my family. I stopped allowing them to build their future from pieces of mine. For the first time, I am not someone's backup plan, emergency fund, hidden guarantee, or disposable daughter. I am alive, and I finally understand that my life never needed their permission to matter.
We hope the story left you with something valuable beyond the drama. This video is completely fictional and made only for educational entertainment. We hope it reminds you that sometimes the people who call you difficult are simply upset that you're no longer easy to manipulate. Growth can make others uncomfortable, but that does not make your growth wrong.